The Awakening of Joel Singer, Part 9, Strong Objections, by Scott McCaffrey. Read for you by Luke Welland. Long Island City, Queens. Kim stood outside the crumbling brick factory amidst broken bottles and scattered newspapers. Her colleague across the street was coming to meet her. Word had come through of a witness in a murder case who had been threatened, one who lived in a dilapidated row house around the corner. The colleague turned toward her and headed for the rendezvous point. A couple of young men in dark suits, perhaps pharmaceutical reps headed to the nearby health clinic, came into view, headed for the cross street. As they passed her colleague, one of the young men withdrew an object from his pocket. Kim immediately whipped out her tranquilizer gun. She saw that the object was just a pen. The young man pressed a button on the pen and pulled out a pad. Kim suddenly found herself accosted by an older, mustachioed beat cop, just as she noticed that there seemed to have been a discharge from the pen that had hit her colleague's ankle. "Hey," the cop said to Kim, "what are you doing down on my beat?" Kim noticed that her colleague was agitated just as another young man in a gray suit came walking by her. He had no gun, a bulge she had long learned to detect. "Hey, I'm talking to you." "I have to go," she said to the indignant cop. She took one last glance at the man passing behind her, but he remained phlegmatic and seemingly oblivious to the nearby confrontation. Her colleague had easily caught up with the young man in dark suits. Within a moment, he was holding them both in midair by their collars with one hand, while he inspected the pen with the other. Kim walked toward them even though her colleague clearly had the situation in hand. The man who had passed by her turned to the right to cross the street, a move she barely noticed out of her peripheral vision. The helpless men looked dumbfounded, and Kim suddenly got a nagging feeling that their shock was not just due to the strength of their captor. She took a step closer to better investigate, but felt a light sting on her ankle. A minute prior, she would have taken it for a pebble that had been kicked up. She looked down and saw the barb, no longer than a bee's stinger. She removed it and looked up again quickly enough to see the smug face of the perpetrator, 20 feet away, the one who had just crossed the street. The skinny young man in the gray suit thought he had been sly, an impression she corrected by traversing the distance between them in a blink and snatching the pen from his hand before he could put it back in his pocket. She threw him down with the other hand, keeping him down with her foot. Looking at the barb from her ankle, she realized that she actually felt stronger as a burst of energy coursed through her veins. "So that's your plan?" she said to the prostrate man. "You know poisons won't work, so you tried to frame us for taking speed? Did you really think you wouldn't get caught in the act? You might as well be moving in slow motion." Kim had to admit to herself, however, that the pen idea was clever. The initiate's senses had been honed to detect not just the slightest glint of gunmetal, but even the sound of a pistol sliding against cloth or leather. The man looked just as nonplussed as his assumptive partners in crime had. However, when the thug craned his neck to see down the street, he seemed relieved by what he saw. Kim saw her partner's arm start to falter as the two men in his grip were slowly and involuntarily lowered. Seconds later, he collapsed. "What's in the barbs?" she yelled at her captive. A smile was his only reply. The cop who had berated her earlier now came over. "What's happening here?" he yelled at her captive. The goon pulled out a gun and shot the cop through the chest, a split second before Kim could knock the gun away. She felt shock at her plodding response as she put the thug's arms behind his back and procured handcuffs from her pocket. She had just slapped the first link on the man's wrist when she started to feel woozy. She went for the second wrist 2 inches away and missed. The slight movement threw her off balance, sending her face first from her knees into the dusty road and oblivion, never to wake again. La Paz, Bolivia. Francesca burst into the windowless conference room in the center of the Capitol building. "Don't go outside and stay away from the windows," she implored the group. Demetrius ignored the advice, but then he hadn't forgotten the windows were 4-inch thick bulletproof plexiglass. Looking through the windows then at the monitors, he saw a sight both horrible and unthinkable. Dozens of comatose and possibly dead initiates were strewn across the city landscape, along with about 10 comrades dodging and battling ferociously against a barrage of onrushing attackers. More than 1,000 prone enemies surrounded the initiates. Demetrius turned away and headed for the door. "Where are you going?" Francesca asked him, and the half-dozen initiates followed him. The leader's phone rang as he reached for it. It was Dr. Harrington, who was in country but had traveled south in search of a recently missing General Marquez.
"Sir, they're rushing right up to our forces. Threat of capture is not deterring them." "I know. Permission requested. Granted. Whatever it takes, and I'm on my way back to help." "Thank you, sir. We've got it from here," Demetrius replied as he tossed the phone aside. As they ran into the courtyard, Demetrius's eyes were fixated on one of his entrapped colleagues on the other side of the massive gates. Over 50 attackers now surrounded his comrade, who gamely twisted and turned away from the poisonous darts, even as he put down several enemies per second with his own rapid-fire tranquilizer gun. They were falling so fast, it looked like his fellow initiate stood in the center of a 50-foot circumference ice patch covered in Crisco. But more just kept coming, bounding 20 feet over the gate while flipping and contorting himself with precision. Demetrius fired away with his tranquilizer gun, his attackers falling like dominoes. Demetrius and the 6 CVs behind him resembled several clusters of flies as they dodged, as if the very breeze from the darts now aimed at them pushed the parts of their bodies just out of their grasp. Having saved their entrapped colleague, Demetrius and his partners now burst onto the street-turned-battlefield and were immediately set upon by over 100 enemies, forasteros and former Bolivian army regulars alike, all holding the weapons that looked like pens, the nearest of them within spitting distance. They both fired away as the two groups charged one another, until Demetrius took the nearest man's legs out and plunged his fist cleanly through his chest. The mob that had been racing toward them suddenly reversed, post-haste, like a powerful wave bounced back by a sea wall, tripping over each other as they went. They turned the corner onto a large plaza. The CVs ran after them, and directly into a trap. As Demetrius sprinted into the plaza, he saw too late hundreds of combatants atop the massive, flat roof of the Basilica de San Francisco. A dense wall of dozens of darts came right toward Demetrius, formed by the scattershot trajectories. He braced for death as the darts were about to hit. A massive ripple of kinetic energy swept the darts aside with a thunderous whoosh. Demetrius turned to his right and saw Dr. Harrington, racing toward them with superhuman speed. Their leader swept to the front of the CVs and waved them on against General Mezclan's men. Demetrius and his troop chased them down like they were standing still. They picked off their enemies in a flurry of inverted kneecaps, shattered clavicles, and wrenched mandibles. Dr. Harrington snatched a weapon away from a young teenager, grinding an intervening finger into powder as he extricated the device. The retreating mob turned a corner and began to thin out. Demetrius, Dr. Harrington, and the other CVs chased after the mob to incapacitate the next would-be assassin, and froze. 2 young men were each dragging the body of a CV behind them. A cheering crowd surrounded them. The black fatigues of the initiates were shredded and torn as they were pulled over jutting rocks. But their bodies were eerily pristine. The savage horde threw rocks at the bodies full force from point-blank range, each member trying to crack the heretofore impervious shells. The crowd initially cheered even louder as the mob of their cohorts turned the corner, apparently thinking they had come to join the celebration. Their misperception vaporized as Dr. Harrington charged ahead of the group and headed straight for those dragging the bodies. He and the CVs dodged another flurry of darts, all while taking out dozens of guerrillas with their tranquilizer guns. The 2 young but big, bearded forasteros who had been dragging the bodies now futilely fired away at Dr. Harrington, who again sent kinetic waves knocking the barbs away. They gave their pens when Dr. Harrington got within an arm's length. They did not run. They did not cower. They did hand over their pens as the crowd stopped and looked at this new spectacle. One of the men simply said, "Okay, you got us. Take us to the Bob Mahal." Dr. Harrington clenched his jaw almost imperceptibly. He then took the pens and jabbed them through the larynx of each of the men. They fell dead with a soft thud. Francesca walked past the newspaper stand on her way to No-Tech headquarters. The New York Times headline read, 1,000 mysterious CVs reported killed.
The first section briefly mentioned that the attacks had been caught live on only a handful of camera phones with chaotic video. It also reviewed the many rumors and reports of seemingly superhuman feats by the CVs, but also that no such feats had been caught live by a news crew. That section surprised Francesca greatly at first, but upon further consideration, she realized that the initiates served in some of the most dangerous and unwelcoming areas of the world. She then thought about the speed with which the initiates worked. Combine all that with the natural reluctance of respected newspapers to publish a story about history's first super beings, and maybe it wasn't so shocking that the true nature of the CVs was still fodder for speculation. She was outside Ron's office a couple of minutes later. She knew she wasn't the only visitor he would receive that day. Robert had called almost all officers and top personnel back from Bolivia after the massacre. Only Demetrius and a team of about 500 initiates remained in Bolivia, which was considered more than sufficient now that any remaining would-be attackers understood death would be the consequence for attempting a follow-up attack with the poison barbs. There was an elusive air of tension, even among the uninformed assistants, as Francesca walked to Ron's office. "Today must be my lucky day for visitors," Ron said as Francesca closed the door. "I must say I'm impressed," Francesca said, "although I'm not sure if it's by your ingenuity or your brutality." Ron smiled ironically. 5 years from now, you'll be impressed by my foresight." "The same foresight that told you to keep me in the dark about the massacre?" "Yes, you can thank me later for sparing you from doing what needed to be done." "Next time, try sparing the 1,000 lives instead of my guilt." Ron chuckled lightly. "Over 150,000 people die every day, my dear. Usually for nothing. This time it was to stop a catastrophe." "How was it done, anyway?" "I'm not supposed to get into details, which isn't too tough since I wouldn't understand them anyway. But essentially, we were able to put a little twist on Joel's cancer treatment." "So your poison followed behind something beneficial and attached to it before the cell membrane could close?" "Basically, yes." "I presume you put the blame on Robert then, along with Joel, perhaps?" "I haven't blamed anyone. Yet. I'm letting the CVs stew about it for a while, but Bob would be the top suspect for planning the attack no matter what. It's undeniable he let the attack happen. Even I didn't anticipate he would come out with an antidote just a couple of days after the massacre. He couldn't signal he allowed his troops to remain vulnerable any more clearly if he took out a full-page ad in the Washington Post." "And Joel?" "Come outside with me for a minute," Ron responded cryptically. Ron had his own small patio with ivy-ensconced railing outside his private office. As they stepped out, Ron motioned toward a pileup on the West Side Highway that had rendered it closed. A large white delivery van flipped onto its side was at the front. Now, maybe the guy driving that van swerved to miss a kid. Maybe someone cut him off. Maybe that pileup isn't really his fault. But that accident is a bad one. Francesca nodded. She had gotten word of the road closure, which was 2 hours and counting. That many people delayed that long, some folks missed something damn important, Ron said. Someone missed a second interview for a dream job. Someone's late visiting their daughter at the hospital, and that's the guy who held them back. Just like Joel caused the initiates to be held back. Robert's fear and envy of Joel. Francesca replied. Ron nodded. Once Joel came along, Bob got more interested, studying him than letting his own creations develop. All those restrictions he put on the growth of the initiates to cap them at a certain level. He might have reversed them someday. Instead, he is letting the CVs fade into obsolescence while he chases Joel into godhood. They went back inside. So what now? Francesca asked. You mentioned a few of the CVs have already done some work for you. On the side, yes. Some tepid side missions not contravening Bob's interests. But taking the next step is going to require greater numbers and greater commitment. It requires landing the big fish. Demetrius, Francesca replied. I suppose you're going to make him into a murderer too, then. A murderer? You merely planted a tracking device, as it turned out. Should I explain that to her family? Ron did not immediately answer. I didn't hear you complaining when Bob put you in charge of social policy for a whole country. How many thousands will that save? Starting with the hundreds of General Mesclan's men who've been arrested for war crimes already? The ones Marquez would have compromised with? And how else would we have gotten Marquez out of the way? A cushy job on K Street with the lithium lobby? I don't know, but I would have preferred something short of making me an assassin. Ron paused again. You know, my skills aren't so different from Joel's. We're both good at bringing out what's already there. All right, here come your assignments, Stan said to the men in the Reform Center conference room. Murphy, you're going to the modular home factory. I told them nothing more than twisting screws for you, he said, drawing a chuckle from the 20 or so men in the classroom. Morelli, we got you a mechanic job. Don't screw it up. Remember, we've got to pay up if you screw up, so don't do it. You'd be the first one, so I'd have plenty of time to come take it out of your ass. Morelli chuckled. I got it, boss. Okay, now everyone listen up. Here are your partner pairings. Where's Joel? A voice suddenly interjected. Stan turned to see a fit man of about 50 barging through the door, a man who mysteriously had keycard access. I don't know, sir. Try his office. Now, if you don't mind, we're in the middle of a meeting. I looked there. I don't know then, Stan replied, turning back to the group. Then take your best guess, the man yelled as he came in, and Stan found himself suddenly turned roughly by his shoulders. A couple of the prisoners started to stand, but Stan motioned for them to sit back down. I said I'm not finished here. Now take your hand off my shoulder, he said calmly but firmly. Gladly, Dr. Harrington replied, removing his hand. Now, since I'm the man who makes sure your paycheck doesn't bounce, I'd like to know— Dr. Harrington, Tina said, in a bright, if harried manner as she poked her head in the door. It's a pleasure to see you. I'm sorry Joel's not in his office. He's in his training room. He should be done there in about 15 minutes. Great. Where's that? Dr. Harrington asked as he walked out the door, leaving a visibly relieved group behind. It's just down this hall, but I'm afraid he's asked not to be disturbed while in there, and none of us have access to the room. Well, we'll just have to create access then, won't we? Dr. Harrington said as he strode to the vault-like metal door with Tina following behind disconcertingly. But Dr. Harrington kicked at the door with otherworldly strength, sending the 1-ton door flying off its moorings. Inside, Joel stood about 50 feet from the door, careening toward him. Tina saw Joel immediately send kinetic waves through the air, slowing the door down. He caught it with one hand and deposited it on the floor with a clunk. Tina could smell hot metal as Dr. Harrington confronted Joel. He suddenly picked the younger man up with one hand and held him in midair. Were you behind that attack? He growled at Joel. Joel did not immediately respond. Instead, Tina felt the air grow colder as it seemed to draw into Joel. She saw Joel's throat start to glisten with slime of some kind. Her friend maintained a look of calm defiance as Dr. Harrington began to visibly struggle with his increasingly heavier and more slippery captive. Finally, he was forced to set down his quarry and release his grip. No, I didn't, Joel belatedly replied to the doctor's question. How did you get so strong? Dr. Harrington ignored Joel's question. Are you sure you weren't involved? Yes, and you can stop scanning me. I'm not suppressing my heartbeat or doing anything else to hide a lie. There was a pause. Fine. Who did it then? I don't know. I'm sorry you wasted your time coming here. Oh, don't worry about that. I think I can make this a productive trip. For starters, I can have you get rid of that insolent Stan character. Get rid of Stan? He's my right-hand man here. I also don't care for his setting up those convicts with jobs or this buddy system of his to enable the criminals to plot with each other. He couldn't better assist them in committing more crimes if he drove the getaway car. I must respectfully disagree. Those two aspects of the rehabilitation program are not based on sentimentality. Well before this reform center opened, both strategies you mentioned, the job placements and partnering, had been shown to greatly reduce recidivism rates. Good job placement programs alone have been shown to reduce 1-year recidivism by over 85%, and yes, we've been through the statistics. Mine always tell a different story. In any case, the point is we're employing cold, hard logic here. There was another pause. I can see you've gained confidence, said Dr. Harrington. Thank you. It wasn't a compliment, Dr. Harrington said, followed by a hard stare. Is this the source of your newfound bravado? All the training you've been doing in this hangar? He looked around the warehouse and the various implements it contained. Everyone must develop their potential. My skills don't come to me fully developed any more than for a normal person. Well, I hope you get all your training in before something pressing comes up, Dr. Harrington said sardonically. I know we've disagreed about my getting involved in Bolivia, but it just wouldn't have felt right to me. I'm afraid you're going to have to put your feelings aside. I can't leave. You don't have to go anywhere. I need your help tweaking a device I've built. If I had another week, I'd do it myself, but I'm afraid time is running out on us. Why? The government is currently debating whether to take me and some of my men into custody in light of recent events. They will unquestionably try to do so after my next move. What's that? To kill everyone who killed my kids. Joel stood in stunned silence. You're talking about thousands of people. Yes. I can't get involved in building such a device. Oh, I've already built such a device. Like I said, I just need your help tweaking it. I've designed the device to put out a death signal. I can tweak it to target a certain sex, age, and ethnicity. Plus, we can track everyone who was in towns where attacks occurred that day through dust particles. But we've discovered that whoever fired one of those guns has a slight residue on their hands. I need you to combine a detector of that residue with my device. You see, you'll be saving lives, not ending them. I'm not so sure anyone else sees it that way. Right now, it doesn't matter how anyone else sees it. Including the U.S. government? Yes, for starters, the U.S. government isn't going to kill every Bolivian male between 12 and 30 who was in those towns that day except those fighting alongside General Marquez. If you don't help me, I'm going to ensure that consequence personally. Maybe I'll kill all the knights in New York while I'm at it. They're all guilty enough as far as I'm concerned. Tina saw the look of unmitigated horror on Joel's face, even as her own stomach felt turned inside out. She did not need to be an expert on Bolivia or the Knights to know hundreds of thousands of extra deaths could occur. And those extra deaths will be on your hands, Dr. Harrington said. He walked past Joel and headed for the door. Turning, he said, I'll be expecting that gadget tomorrow. In the meantime, I hope you don't mind if I bunk up here. This isn't the easiest area to find a hotel, he said as he passed Tina. And people think they just dump chemicals in New Jersey, Ron quipped to Hector as they walked through the state-of-the-art laboratory that could have contained a large banquet hall with room to spare. They turned to Hector's office just as they passed a dresser-sized device that was sending electric jolts through liquids pouring in from either side. Let me know if Frankenstein's monster crawls out of that thing, Ron said with whimsical, feigned trepidation, drawing a laugh. They entered Hector's small but functional office, closing the door behind them. Thank you for coming down, Ron. It's nice to see you take an interest. Oh, I have for a long time, particularly in you. If you don't mind, before we get on to other things, I want to ask you about something. Sure. I appreciated how you wanted me to speak with Dr. Harrington about Bolivia and the murder of my first wife there by Los Forasteros during my interview. But I have to wonder, the group that has gone over there, is it run by Dr. Harrington? You've heard those rumors too, have you? I have, and I must say I feel ambivalent if I had something to do with motivating the mission. From what little I've heard, the results have been mixed. And that was before all those CVs were killed. I can tell you that some of NoTech's technology has been used in the relief operations. I'm not sure beyond that. What about these community volunteers, the CVs? Do they really have superhuman abilities? What about these gadgets they're supposedly using? I don't know much about them or where Bob fits in. Still, it is cause for concern if he is running a monopoly, or at best an oligopoly with Joel, when it comes to NoTech's most important activities and technology. I could see that, Hector said hesitantly. That is why I've brought you this, Ron said as he took a thick folder out of his briefcase. It contained numbered documents. He also handed him a flash drive. What is this? That is the bulk of heretofore inaccessible information I could gather for you. The stuff not available to the great unwashed. Am I allowed to study these? Maybe not, but I think for the good of the company you should. Dr. Harrington isn't going to be with us forever, especially if he is getting mixed up in these activities of dubious legality. And Joel's going to do what Joel's going to do. And that can be tough to predict. We need someone else ready to keep No-Tech at the leading edge of technology, and that person needs access to our best research." "I understand." "Good. I'll leave you to your studies, especially since I've just saddled you with extra work. We'll leave this between you and me then." Hector nodded. He was already going through the documents as Ron got up. The scientist's eyes lit up with fascination at the first read. Ron's hand was on the door when Hector called after him. "Ron, not all these files are from No-Tech. Some are from Imogem." Ron nodded. "Everything I just said about your needing access to our top research goes double for our competitions." Hector did not ask if he should keep possession of the files a secret. "There was something else," Ron said. He explained that while Dr. Harrington wouldn't tell him if he was involved in Bolivia, he implied it by saying he feared death at the hands of the new underground Bolivian leader. So much so he wanted a specific device. The device would send a signal causing General Mesclan's heart to seize in the event of Dr. Harrington's own untimely death. "You want us to come up with a killing device?" "I would have to assume the General's death wouldn't cause you any tears." "No, but—" "Good. I will send you the DNA sample we have to get started." Ron was wearing the penny-sized apparatus within a week. It had been fairly simple to develop. It had a fail-safe component that would activate should it be tampered with by anyone, including Ron himself, say, under duress. Unbeknownst to Hector, the DNA supplied was that of George Burnson, the CEO of Imogem, not General Mesclan. His possession of the device was necessarily not kept a secret. The large crowd was raucous, but not ignorant, not about what affected them so directly. 10,000 strong, they marched along the crowded streets of La Paz, marching on the Capitol building which had been seized by the invaders. They had seen their freedom of movement limited by checkpoints, curfews, and weapon searches. Most onerously, however, the invaders had brought their oppression into their homes. They were having the puppet government jail those who had handled disobedient wives, girlfriends, and children the way they saw fit, and now even whores were having men successfully prosecuted. They had heard most of the Bolivian men supported the measures, not least fathers and brothers of women, but if the supporters were more numerous, they were not going to be louder, or at least not today. Thousands of men had been jailed in the past 3 months, and in some cases they were pursuing cases 5 or more years old. And word was the one dictating the draconian persecutions was an American woman. They had finally gotten a measure of revenge a week prior thanks to weapons supplied by General Mesclan's men, and now they stood ready to finish the job. Hundreds of men held the inconspicuous weapons that had been so effective the week before, although now they thrusted them in the air defiantly and openly. They were within 100 yards of the Capitol gates with signs that read, "Death to America. It's our lithium," and "Our land, our women," in English and Spanish. The steady chanting grew rowdier and more chaotic when they saw 7 of the invaders step out through the front door of the presidential palace and calmly walk out toward the gates. The chanting grew to a fever pitch as the 7 appeared poised to senselessly eschew any room to maneuver. The man in front now saw the gate they had been sure they would have to crash start to open. A predatory gleam was in their eyes as the invaders came within 30 yards of the gate. They nevertheless slowed to a walk, wary of this implausibly serendipitous development. They were within 10 yards of the group who stood in flat-footed formation when an overzealous outlier fired the first projectile with a halting cry. He hit his target. The invader plucked it from his chest, unfazed. The invaders simultaneously removed their own pen-sized devices from their pockets, similar to the ones used against them, but they were solid and rounded on top. The 7 pressed one button at the top of their devices that sounded like some kind of activator, then pressed the other button on the devices. Over 200 men fell dead. The interspersed bodies fell amongst the crowd. Some fell against shocked cohorts before hitting the ground with lifeless thuds. Others fell with no cushion. Still others were pushed to the ground by horrified companions who suddenly found corpses leaning against them. Bafflement over their cohort's fates turned to panic that they might be next. A smattering of fleeing men became a crowd and then an ugly mob as the fear of a second wave of annihilation swept over the throng. Hundreds were pushed down and trampled in the building stampede as a cacophony of terror erupted. The CVs stood stoically, watching the crowd scatter madly backward at a full sprint. The gate remained open. Ron was trying to restore what dignity he could to his disheveled office. The FBI had taken almost every file along with his computer in a pre-dawn raid, and they had put speed and thoroughness before careful handling. "I don't quite see how knocking my chair over and dumping my plant on the floor sped things up for them," Ron had remarked to Carol. They had clearly begun a cursory review of the documents right in his office, with less suspicious papers left in a chaotic heap on his floor. He walked over his unhinged door with a large dent from a battering ram to comfort his assistant Tanya as she began to cry. "Hey, at least they didn't take us with them," he said to Tanya as he put a comforting arm around her. "For now," he added under his breath as he went back to his office. Putting his chair upright with a sigh, he turned on the TV and scanned the news. It was even worse than he expected. "Thousands dead in revenge killings. Worldwide massacre. Vigilante justice," flashed the headlines. Previously, the culpability of the CV's targets had helped to quell dissemination of the CV's attacks by their enemies. The viciousness of the massacre and the distance from the murders that had precipitated them allowed the CV's antagonists to paint themselves as victims. Damning and detailed evidence replaced the prior sketchy reports of the CV's previously quasi-underground crusade. The news had spread virally. Witnesses were legion, but far more damaging were the photos and videos that had been posted on the web and sent to media worldwide. Ron couldn't turn to a channel without seeing the eerily silent falls of the instantly dead bodies in Bolivia and New York, and the placid faces of the CVs that were creating them. The most damaging video, however, had not come from the day prior, but was rather a week old. It showed Dr. Harrington himself, leading a carnage-filled attack while demonstrating superhuman abilities. The culmination of the attack was a grainy, wavering, but sufficiently clean shot of the no-tech CEO plunging small rods of some kind into the throats of what looked to be teenagers. The mitigating fact of the CV's bodies being dragged and the preceding attack by General Mezclan's men and their sympathizers had not been shown, intentionally or not. Obscure prior statements were replaced by fiery excoriations joined by the displaced faction in Bolivia, which railed against the Crusaders and their puppet government. Both the FBI and the International Criminal Court had issued warrants for Dr. Harrington's arrest. The FBI had issued warrants for all 4,000 of the remaining CVs as well. The charges had not been identified, but reports were that Dr. Harrington and many of his protégés were going to be charged with murder, with the rest charged with being accessories to murder. There was wide-ranging speculation about whether Dr. Harrington and his charges would turn themselves in, and what would happen if they didn't. Joel had managed to escape mention in the reports. Ron took a break from his news gathering and looked out his office window. Police cars, including SWAT team vehicles, still surrounded the building. Cops were checking anyone who tried to enter or leave. He knew from reports that there was a similar heavy police presence surrounding Dr. Harrington's home. "Where do you think Bob is?" Carol asked as she poked her head into Ron's office. "I don't know," Ron replied. "What's going to happen to no-tech? Who's going to control all of our products, medicines, or medical innovations?" "Those are all good questions that need to be sorted out. I'm afraid we'll have to answer your first question before we can do that sorting." Carol announced a few minutes later that an FBI officer was there to see him. The neatly groomed young man was led in and sat down. "I suppose you want me to guess again where Dr. Harrington might be right now?" Ron said to the man. "No, that won't be necessary." With that statement, the unfamiliar features of the man morphed into those of Dr. Harrington. Ron felt his jaw drop. "That's quite a trick," Ron said, flabbergasted. "Yes, Joel's been teaching me more than he realizes." "I see. You could stay hidden in plain sight with this new ability. Is that your plan unless things can be worked out?" "No. I simply needed this disguise to buy me some time to put my affairs in order. Then I will be surrendering to the FBI." "You will?" Ron said with obvious surprise. "My hubris and myopia have caused a lot of devastation. And now my rage has caused thousands of deaths, in some cases the deaths of brainwashed children. Not to say all the retaliation was unwarranted. Regardless, I'm going to jail like I deserve.
I only want to ensure that no tech's innovations will be safeguarded, and so will my daughter. Then I will be going down there and into one of those police cruisers. I'm going to instruct my charges to do the same." Ron nodded solemnly. "You're a noble man, Bob. I've never admired you more." Dr. Harrington smiled. "I'm afraid a lot of people don't feel the same way after the reports I've seen." "Yes, well, those videos certainly don't tell the full story." "No, they don't. Not to make excuses. Still, it does seem odd the way those camera phones were out and ready in the middle of an attack at the worst times and places for us," Dr. Harrington said. "I think we've been tempting fate for a while now." "Perhaps, but it's not just that. The timing of the video's releases, the way the images were tailored to present us in the worst possible light, it all seems orchestrated to me." "I'm sure it was," Ron said without hesitation. "We've made ourselves a lot of enemies, and they've been at the propaganda game a lot longer than we have. What was it Lenin once said? Always mix a little truth in with your lies? That's all these videos did. Hopefully that will come out in the trial." "Yes," Ron replied. "And let's hope we can keep the primes from getting out somehow. And if not, that we get those bastards back in prison so fast they think they got trapped in a revolving door." "What do you mean?" Dr. Harrington replied, vexed. "What do the primes have to do with this last incident? We had them rounded up over 10 years ago, their spawn notwithstanding," Dr. Harrington said in reference to the Knights. Ron looked puzzled. "They have nothing to do with the latest incident, but this investigation is going to look at all of No-Tech's extracurricular activities. Not just the latest. The FBI has already been here with well over 100 agents. They took every file they could carry. They're going to end up reading a lot about electrolysis, ion configurations then, because anything related to our missions was encrypted. You know that." "I do, but it's irrelevant. We had to get outsiders involved with our missions, especially with the DNA trackers. The FBI will have their testimony and their files." "Only if they cooperate." "Oh, they are. The rats are jumping off the sinking ship. The same ones you helped put into higher office. You didn't catch the governor's press conference this morning?" "No, I was on my way here." Ron imitated the governor. "In my attempt to ensure the safety of my beloved New York, I bent some rules that should not have been. Although I'm still proud that crime was reduced by 75% during my term as New York's Attorney General. I'm not proud that I was taken in by a man and a company whose disregard for law and callous self-righteousness led to the recent tragedies in New York and Bolivia." "That sounds like a pretty half-hearted apology," Dr. Harrington said. "Yes, I have to give him credit," Ron replied. "Bragging and covering his ass combined with a self-serving mea culpa all in one. Pretty impressive, actually." Dr. Harrington smiled ironically but said nothing, gazing down at the armada of law enforcement vehicles below. "Tell me, Ron," he finally said, "how did it come to this?" Ron gritted his teeth as a look of appalled shock escaped. Even here, in the midst of mayhem caused by his quixotic solipsism, he asks that question? "How did it come to this?" Ron said quietly but angrily to himself. But now was not the time to reveal the sentiment to Bob. The CEO turned disconcertingly to Ron just as the head counsel switched to a pensive look of his own. "I don't know, Bob. You always tried to do what you thought was right." There was another pause. "But that isn't always what happened," Dr. Harrington said. "I know that, and here I stand ready to turn myself in. And suddenly a wrench gets thrown into the works. It shouldn't be any big deal, though," Dr. Harrington said, taking on a brighter tone. "I'm sure they'll be reasonable. Hell, if I behave myself, maybe they'll send me to Joel's resort out there in the desert." Ron smiled in return. "I've drawn up contingency plans if I do go to jail. I'm hoping to at least remain chairman. I'll have the details sent to you." "Good. Hopefully you can get me a computer as well?" Ron replied jokingly, waving at the haphazardly strewn computer in his office. "I'll work on that too. Now I just need the FBI to drop the idea of overturning any convictions against the primes. That shouldn't be too hard. I don't think there are too many folks out there clamoring to have any of those characters back as neighbors." Dr. Harrington gave another smile as he said this. It was not returned. "What is it?" he finally said to Ron. "Bob, they're not going to consider dropping anything until you turn yourself in.
especially for something as clearly illegal as the use of those tracking devices. They weren't clearly illegal to me. The only thing that's clear is how many of those vermin those devices help put away. Maybe so, but... Ron, my God, have you forgotten? Do you not recall that those scumbags were the ones who killed my wife? That they were the whole impetus for not just those tracking devices back then, but all of our missions these past 2 years? Of course not. I'm just saying that we need to take one step at a time. No, that's the first step, or there is no next one. It's too late once I've turned myself in. I'll have lost most of my leverage if I do that. I don't think the FBI will drop the charges. Even if they did, you'd have to deal with charges from the NYPD and maybe other local departments. You're right. Dr. Harrington paused. I'm going to need assurances in writing the Prime stay in jail. It's the only way to settle the issue. It will mean dropping all prosecutions against me, going back more than 10 years. And it has to come from the top. Do you mean a presidential pardon? Ron asked. Is there another kind that would cover us nationwide? No, but make it happen. She has 48 hours to respond. Otherwise, I've got some contingency plans to put into motion. Even as Bob made the request, Ron felt surer than ever in the righteousness of his betrayal. Here was a man ready to switch from surrender to suddenly taking on the entire U.S. government over the fate of a couple hundred aging gangbangers. There had been thousands of lives saved, and thousands of arrests more recent and relevant than those of the men from the old gang that had killed Bob's wife. And yet the Primes were nonetheless the linchpin to how he would act, a linchpin Ron almost felt guilty about using. Bob was also, of course, delusional to think he could remain chairman of NOTEC. But this just further reinforced Ron's observation into human nature. Delusional, self-absorbed, this was how all people were. Bob just being a more extreme example. All the more reason he couldn't allow any one person to have such power. Once Bob and Joel were dead, Ron realized he would be the most powerful person in the world. But that was better, as he would better keep in mind the desires of others, the predictable, puerile desires of others. Corporal Barry Richardson sat in his patrol car looking at the veritable legion of vehicles that surrounded the Singer Reform Center. He had taken his place on the outer ring of the group after a 3-hour drive from Reno. The coffee cups of he and his partner had long since been emptied, bought at the nearest gas station 40 minutes from this godforsaken site. Dust kicked up around his car, which sat 2 acres away from the front gates. A vast array of vehicles, well over 100 in all, consisting of SWAT team trucks, tank-like assault vehicles, and countless other police and FBI cars formed a near-solid mass between him and the large cement buildings. They had sat in their cars for about 10 minutes when Richardson asked his partner, "If this guy doesn't cooperate, are we hoping to shoot him with bullets or smother him with them?" "Maybe they'll just pour them down out of buckets," his partner responded, pointing up to the half-dozen helicopters overhead. "Seriously, though, there's a reason they made us bring a not-so-small army out here. Be ready if this guy picks a fight. I've heard some pretty crazy stuff about what he can do." "Me too," Barry replied. "I've even heard he can walk with his hands cuffed behind his back." "What?" Richardson motioned toward the site, barely visible through the crowd, of a compliant Joel being placed in an FBI vehicle and driven off. "We are getting overtime for the drive back, aren't we?" Richardson said to his partner as the crowd began to break up. Demetrius found Ron sitting, still in his tailored suit but tie loosened, watching the first inning as he entered the luxurious suite at the new Yankee Stadium. "Come in," he said as he turned and waved Demetrius on to a seat next to him. "Last-minute replacement at pitcher," Ron said once Demetrius was seated. "Not sure if you'd heard." Demetrius had not, as Ron probably knew the exploits of world-class athletes had never much impressed the initiates. "Yeah, it was supposed to be that promising rookie Shanahan, but he got into a silly argument yesterday in the locker room, took a swing at McMahon, their MVP third baseman, pulled his shoulder in the deal, and Shanahan got sent down to AAA. Demetrius grunted, eager to get on to more pressing matters. Hard to get too angry at him. They're just kids, really, these rookies. But now Shanahan is going to be one small level down in skill, but 99% down in salary. Most of these AAA guys have to get second jobs. How about that? Yeah, it's funny how one rash decision can be so costly, isn't it? I suppose. So, Are you all set on the plans if the president doesn't come through? Ron asked.
Absolutely.
Good. Let's go back inside, Ron said, waving Demetrius back into the suite and over to the stocked bar. Can I grab you a drink? He said.
Club soda is fine.
You don't want something stiffer?
There's nothing stiffer for us.
Ah, yes, you are immune to poisons, and alcohol is a poison. I think I remember that from health class now.
Is there a reason you thought I needed a drink?
Demetrius surmised there was. Ron turned back to Demetrius with a somber look and nodded. I'm afraid I have to tell you something that might very well prompt you to kill me.
What are you talking about?
He replied with a mixture of simmering anger and confusion. I knew about the attack that killed over 1,000 of your brothers and sisters. Demetrius glared at Ron, but the head counsel of No-Tech remained safe.
You'd be dead already if you weren't about to explain exactly what you're talking about. Every aspect of the plan. Everyone who was involved, he said as he leaned into Ron.
Bob. Dr. Harrington.
What?
Dr. Harrington is who I'm talking about. He controlled every aspect of the plan and everyone who was involved. Demetrius stood in stunned silence.
Assuming for a minute you're not lying, why are you telling me this?
Because of this, Ron replied. He placed a uniquely styled gun in Demetrius's hand.
What is this? Dart guns? They don't work anymore.
These do.
It's another poison, one that still works.
Ron nodded. One round of murder was quite enough for me. He went on to explain as best he could that the new poison worked on the toolkit genes themselves, the ones Dr. Harrington had manipulated to make the last poison inert.
And the genes don't reject this death signal?
Demetrius asked him. No. The poison induces apoptosis, pre-programmed cell death, like a healthy body does with the progenitor of cancer cells, and during the formation of many organs.
It seems simpler than the last poison.
Yes, and no. Ron reminded Demetrius that the energy boost the first poison initially provided was a creative shortcut to gaining entry into the cell. This time they had to match up the drug structure and target exactly without a crutch. Although there was plenty of inside knowledge.
Who's they, anyway? Dr. Harrington and who else?
Do you really need to ask?
Joel?
In his defense, he didn't really want to help, but the threat of shutting down the Reform Center gives the good doctor one hell of a trump card.
You seriously want me to believe Dr. Harrington would kill 1,000 of his own?
1,000, 3,000, what's the difference to him? He needed a test run, and you're his guinea pigs. One's becoming more obsolete with each passing day. Demetrius did not immediately respond.
Why should I believe what you're telling me?
He finally asked. Ron pulled out a voice recorder. On it was the recording of Dr. Harrington telling Ron not to destroy the poison No-Tech's researchers had inadvertently discovered. He stopped by soon thereafter to say the poison needed a test run.
And where is that recording?
Demetrius asked. Does it really matter? That's the thing about technology. It's gotten so good you can't trust it anymore. But since you ask, I tried to get one. He wouldn't give the go-ahead over the phone. And after observing the better living through chemistry in which Bob has been partaking, not least of all the boosts to his senses, I had to be careful about how to get another recording, and I just didn't get one in time.
A perfectly plausible explanation, as any lie from you would be.
That has nothing to do with it, Ron replied. It's not that I'm telling you something plausible, because I'm not really telling you anything, am I? I'm simply confirming what you have already seen with your own eyes. Dr. Harrington gathering power unto himself, his leaving you vulnerable to the first attack, and, of course, you've seen him go from utilizing weapons that were special only because you were wielding them, to producing weapons he could use on his own.
Like the death signal devices,
Demetrius noted. Ron nodded. But that is just the beginning. Dr. Harrington has missions he wishes to continue, drugs he'll need approvals for, a company to run. Do you really think it's feasible for him to battle with the U.S. and other governments every time he meets resistance?
That he can continue to protect you from harm, from persecution, never mind providing for you. And don't forget, he pays you over $100,000 each and puts most of you up in New York City. So that's how he sees us now. I heard the ungrateful bastard bemoaning the onus on him transporting us back to the U.S., having to smuggle us back in various cargo ships, as if it were a holiday for us. I thought he was just complaining about the government's treatment at the time, but at what point will he decide the rest of you aren't worth the trouble either? That he can accomplish everything the CVs can, or more? Yes, that is how it seems to me as well. Now you're thinking for yourself, Ron replied. You know what else I'm thinking? What's that? Demetrius had his hand around Ron's throat in an instant. I'm thinking you deserve to die, whether you're lying or not. A flash of terror crossed Ron's face, but it was almost instantly replaced by a look of rage. Fine. The no-tech head counsel croaked. The odd response caused Demetrius to loosen his grip. Fine. If you're going to kill me, you go ahead and kill me, but then you better take this, he said, pulling out the dart gun from his suit jacket. And stop that madman from killing the 4,000 CVs he didn't kill already, and God knows who else after that. Right around the time they're putting me 6 feet under, you'll realize you don't have a fucking clue how to stop him without me. Demetrius released his grip. Let's say we do stop Dr. Harrington, and Joel for that matter, he said. Then what? You're going to try to control me instead of him? No, not control you, manage opportunities for you. You and the others who join us. You'll choose which missions you see as worthwhile and conduct them on your own terms. You'll be the crown jewel of the operation, instead of becoming an obsolete relic. Still, I'll never get everyone on board, and you could be talking about countries with millions. Ron put up a hand to stop him. Whatever the size of the country, it's only a few people who matter. Demetrius nodded. It's all just going to be about money and power, he asked. Ron paused. It's always about money and power. Those who fail to realize that are the first to go when the revolution succeeds. That's why this revolution is going to be better, more durable, more honorable. We're going to skip the pretense that it's about anything else, after all. If no one is paying you to do something, then no one gives a shit about it. And how is that sustainable? Do you think Dr. Harrington is just about money and power? Ron shook his head. Sometimes the revolution's biggest sucker is the guy who started it. Do you look at Bob and see the next Lenin? Ron shook his head again. He's the next Trotsky. Still, I'm not going to join a group of mercenaries. Pragmatists, Ron corrected. Pragmatists who will do far more good than those facilitating Dr. Harrington's twisted pipe dream. Are we going to get paid? Damn straight. But we will kowtow to no one. So what do we do now? Demetrius said after a tense silence. Right now, just prepare for this fight that could be a couple of days away. Stay alive and prove your worth. Count on it, Demetrius replied. The Secretary of Defense brought the letter into the Oval Office personally, with a young aide in tow. What's this? The president asked as Romwell handed her the document. A letter requesting a pardon from Dr. Harrington. A pardon for what? We haven't even managed to arrest him yet, never mind formally bring all the charges. He wants a pardon, Libby, the secretary said to the president. A pardon for any crimes he or Notek might have committed 10 years ago or longer. 10 years ago? But Dr. Harrington didn't get his various crusades going until 2 years ago. The aide responded demurely. That's not entirely true, Madam President. Certainly the operations Dr. Harrington and his group have conducted over the past couple of years have been much greater in scale and scope than what occurred over 10 years ago, but Dr. Harrington did conduct a more focused and evidently more personal effort going back over a decade. He went on to briefly review the operation, the DNA tracking devices and the related monitors, the cooperation with the police that put away the primes, and how it had all been inspired by the murder of his wife. To him, putting the primes in jail was more important than all the progress he made later in New York, and everywhere else combined," Romwell added.
"That hardly seems judicious," the president replied.
"A judicious man wouldn't have done most of the things Dr. Harrington has done," Romwell said.
The president nodded. "They might stay in jail anyway," the president said. "The courts are going to look for a reason to keep a bunch of gang members behind bars."
"He wants a guarantee," Romwell said.
There was a pause. "And if I say no?" "He has threatened immediate and severe consequences, Madam President," the aide said. "Like what? Is he going to pull one of his drugs off the market?" The secretary and the aide looked at one another. "Madam President," the aide responded, "Dr. Harrington has threatened to launch an attack." "Against whom?" "Against us." "Us? The White House? The entire U.S. military? Don't be ridiculous." "Madam President," the aide said, "they'll be looking to kidnap you and hold you until you sign the pardon." "Oh, please."
"Listen, Libby," the secretary said as he motioned toward the aide.
"Madam President, there is cause for concern," the aide said. "The CVs are extremely skilled fighters."
"Yes, they are," Romwell said, putting up his hands in a calming stance. "But still, we might be able to stop any attack before it begins."
"How?"
"By launching one of our own. We got a tip on the location of the CV's headquarters and training center, which a recon squad was able to confirm. We have a squadron of bombers that has already left from their base in Alaska. They will be there in a matter of hours."
"A matter of hours? Why wasn't I informed?"
There was an awkward pause, but nevertheless a firm response from the secretary. "You gave me the responsibility to bring in Dr. Harrington and his group after the massacre they conducted. The decision was tactical, not operational."
The tension eased as the president asked, "How big is this facility?" The aide went on to describe it as being comparable to a mid-sized college campus. He related that there was nothing unusual about it aside from its incomparably remote location and its reputed camouflage. "Any armaments?"
"None visible," Romwell interjected. "Of course, the CVs don't need much weaponry to do a lot of damage. Nevertheless, we think the attack will be a success."
"Why is that?"
"Based on the concern Dr. Harrington has shown for his charges in the past. We think he'll back off if we capture or kill just a few of them, and maybe only one of them."
"And if we fail, what are we facing? What the hell are these guys capable of? Are they really superhuman?"
"Yes, their capabilities go beyond those of normal men," Romwell replied.
"What about the poison darts?" "Our intelligence reports indicate they've already been given a vaccine that renders it useless, Madam President," the aide said. "Okay, but attack how? Have they gotten their hands on military hardware?"
"Maybe, but that's the least of our worries. We're worried more about the stuff Dr. Harrington came up with on his own," Romwell said.
The president understood from the intelligence reports she had read. The weapon they had that dissolved tanks, planes, you name it.
"But the soldiers themselves are our main concern," Romwell said. "As Dr. Harrington has said himself, they're his greatest weapon. Their speed, their toughness, their precision. Still, they aren't invincible."
Romwell turned to the aide. The aide was caught off guard but replied, "Yes, Madam President. The CVs are not invulnerable. The poison used against them before is no longer effective, but it is possible to harm them with traditional weaponry." The aide relayed estimates that 100 armor-piercing rounds in a minute would kill a CV, or a couple dozen rounds out of a mounted gun, less with shells or artillery. Their experts had determined it was better to blanket a whole kill zone to neutralize the CV's acrobatics.
"It worked for others," Romwell added.
"Yes, Madam President, that's correct. We have advantages as well. We think the CVs want to avoid killing our soldiers or anyone else."
"Still, we're going to clear the area," Romwell added.
"Okay, so where am I going? Out to the bunker in West Virginia?" the president asked. The secretary and aide looked at each other again.
"Libby, one of the things playing to our advantage is that this guy wants a confrontation. That's why he'll let us build up our forces here. But they'll snatch you in transit if you hit the road, and it will be easier for them."
"Like the way our nuclear arsenal is most vulnerable when part of it's in transit," President Horner said, nodding. "That's right, Madam President. We can't guarantee secrecy, and no security detail could match what we can put in place here." The president paused. What about the first of them, the special one? Has he been picked up?
Yes. We don't think he would have fought with Dr. Harrington anyway, though. Joel's already had a falling out over not joining them on past missions.
A falling out? Might he fight for us, then?
The secretary shrugged. He doesn't seem to like fighting at all. I don't think it matters one way or the other. 3 of the CVs took him out early last year, and we'll be dealing with over 2,000 of them this time. There was another pause.
So this guy just wants a pardon on what happened 10 years ago and to keep these primes in prison? He isn't looking to avoid prison himself?
Well, Madam President, there were just a couple of other conditions Dr. Harrington was seeking.
He wants access to medical research equipment, which he'll pay for, and a sentence of no longer than 20 years. 20 years is a long time for a man in his 50s.
It is, the aide replied,
but we believe that Dr. Harrington has gone through extensive hormonal and even gene therapy. We think he would age very slowly, if at all, and even speed up his perception of time. That would come in handy. Interesting. Still, the president continued, he's not asking for much to make this whole standoff go away.
You mean he's letting us do what we see fit?
Except the parts to which he strongly objects,
Romwell replied.
Something like that.
You know, the secretary said, there's a word for a man who lets his countrymen do what they see fit, unless he strongly objects.
What's that?
A dictator.
Robert looked shaken as Francesca entered. He was under a fake name here at the New York Hilton, a nice enough hotel, but also a more discreet choice than showing up at the Waldorf with fake identification, paying cash. Even a genetically modified appearance did not allow Robert to move with impunity. Not now, when the government's perception of what was possible had become much more fluid. Francesca rushed into his arms. It's not fair. You've just been doing what you thought was right. And this is how they thank you, turning you into a fugitive?
Robert held her close. I never went into this expecting fair treatment, and if they wish to prosecute me, then so be it. But to allow murderous thugs to go free, to shut down my missions and give free rein to mayhem and evil, that I cannot abide.
That's what I mean, though. Francesca went on to describe how the reduced force in Bolivia, now down to 500, was relegated to guarding humanitarian workers and stopping raids, even as General Mesclan was gaining back ground. Dr. Harrington sighed.
Just let me get through this coming weekend, and I'll address all of those things.
Francesca set aside her priorities being put second again and laid her head on Robert's shoulder. She found him evasive about where he would be if trouble began. He simply said it would be a secure location that would be neither at the hotel nor a battlefield. Finally, Francesca asked where Joel was and where he might be at the end of the 48-hour deadline. Dr. Harrington said he didn't know, but that it was probably somewhere where he would choose to stay in safe captivity.
And this time,
Dr. Harrington added,
that's a good thing.